Now turn to page 5 of The Beatles and read along with the cassette.
They were 4 young men from Liverpool, England. Their music was loved by millions of people during the 1960s. When they got together, none of them expected to become the most popular group in the music world. Liverpool was a city of factories, but more people were out of work there than in any other place in England. When they had nothing to do, teenagers went to clubs where small bands played for them. As many as 350 bands played in Merseyside, part of Liverpool. The Mersey Beat was a newspaper known only to people who went to such clubs. Later, the Beatles made Liverpool and the newspaper famous. Alan Williams, the Beatles' first manager, owned the Jacaranda and the Cavern Club, where the Beatles often played. None of the groups made much money at the clubs, but at least they could eat. John Lennon. John Lennon was born in October 1940. His father had left his mother before he was born. "Please stay until the baby is born." John was raised by his aunt.
"Here's a story I wrote for you."
John liked to write, draw, and listen to records. When he was 11, John heard Bill Haley and the Comets. Then he found he liked the records of Elvis Presley.
Are you listening to Rock Around the Clock again?
No, this is an American singer named Elvis Presley. I'm glad you came to see me. Will you buy me a guitar?
If I can find one for $10, it's yours. A guitar's all right, John, but you'll never earn a living from it. John's mother bought him his first guitar. She died when he was 16. His aunt continued to help him. Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was born in June 1942. He was a good student, but he wasn't very interested in school. Paul, you can do better than this.
I guess I was thinking about music.
His mother taught him to play the piano, banjo, and guitar.
You play piano well.
You're not so bad yourself. Paul's mother died when he was 14. Playing the guitar seemed to make him feel better. Soon he met John Lennon.
I need another guitar player for the Quarrymen. How about joining us?
All right. Maybe we could write some music, too.
So Paul joined the Quarrymen when he was 15. George Harrison. George Harrison was born in February 1943. He had a happy home, but he was always in trouble at school.
George, what's wrong at school? I'm getting bad reports.
Oh, I don't know.
As a teenager, George was part of a rough gang.
My folks are great, but I need to be on my own.
My folks don't care if I'm alive or dead.
George was 14 before he became interested in music. Then his friend, Paul McCartney, taught him to play the guitar.
You never liked music before?
Now I do. I want to get a guitar.
George isn't much younger than I was when I joined last year.
He's good, so he's in.
George joined the Quarrymen in 1958. Later, John changed the name of his group to the Silver Beatles, and then to the Beatles. The beat in Beatles stood for beat music. Beatles played at many of the clubs in Merseyside. In those days, they were joined by several different people on guitar and drums. In 1960, Alan Williams, their manager, got them a date to play at a music club in Hamburg, Germany.
They're making so much noise they can't hear.
They don't understand English anyway. Just play loud and scream the words.
The loud music was just what the Germans wanted to hear.
Let's act like German soldiers and do the goose step.
The Germans loved to see the Beatles make jokes, even if they made fun of Hitler. The Beatles were often very tired. They sometimes played for 8 hours at a time. But somehow, they found the time to make their first record in Hamburg. Soon after this, the group went back to Liverpool. One day in 1961, someone came into Brian Epstein's store and asked for a record Brian didn't have.
My Bonnie, I don't know it, but I'll get it for you.
Brian Epstein found the record and liked it. Then he went to see the Beatles.
I like your record. I've seen your act, and I like that too. I want to be your manager.
The Beatles agreed. Then Brian went to talk to his lawyer.
You're always starting new things. How long will this one last?
Brian Epstein was the Beatles' manager until his death in 1967. He was the person who most helped the Beatles become famous. One day, George went swimming. He had no comb, so his hair looked strange when it dried.
That's the look I want for all of you. And I'll pick new clothes for you too.
Epstein tried to interest several record companies in the Beatles. They all turned him down.
The Beatles will be more famous than Presley.
Go back to your store, Brian.
Finally, Epstein got George Martin of EMI to listen to the Beatles.
They have something. Yes, I'll help them.
Meanwhile, John, Paul, and George grew angry with their drummer, Pete Best.
Pete forgets we're a group.
He acts as if he's a one-man band.
Martin knew that Pete did not fit into the group. Epstein liked Pete, but he had to ask him to leave the band.
I'm sorry, Pete, but we have to do what EMI says.
I'll find other work.
In August 1962, Ringo Starr became the Beatles' drummer. Nobody had ever heard of him, but as the fourth Beatle, Ringo Starr held his own with the others. Ringo Starr. Richie Starkey was born in July 1940. He was to become Ringo Starr. I wish I had a brother or sister to play with. You're enough for us. Until he became a teenager, Ringo was often sick. He spent quite a bit of time in hospitals.
He is too weak to go home yet.
Ringo met the other Beatles in Hamburg, where he was playing with another group.
My rooms are even worse than these. I'll take Liverpool any day.
Do you like it better because you have a girlfriend there?
Until this time, groups had always recorded songs already written.
I can't find a song I like for the Beatles.
So Martin let them record Love Me Do, written by John and Paul.
A group has never recorded its own song before.
Someday, all music groups will do it.
In January 1963, the Beatles' record, Please, Please Me, was the most popular song in England. In February, they made their first national tour.
I don't believe all this.
I wish there were more police.
In May, on their tour, the Beatles had top billing. The fans screamed, fainted, and got into fights. Later, this way of behaving was called Beatlemania. In October, the Beatles appeared on TV.
They'd better let me in. I've been here all day.
All day, crowds of people had tried to get into the theater. Later, returning from a tour of Sweden, the Beatles found huge crowds waiting for them.
I've never seen anything like this in my life.
In November, they appeared on a show attended by Queen Elizabeth.
Those of you in the cheap seats, clap your hands. You rich people, just rattle your jewelry.
There were 250,000 orders for the Beatles album. With the Beatles, before it even came out. There were 1 million orders for their single record, I Want to Hold Your Hand. In December, after the Beatles' Christmas show, newspapers began calling their songs the best of 1963. One paper even said they wrote the best music since Beethoven. When 4 of the Beatles' songs were popular in America, Brian Epstein planned their first visit to the United States. 10,000 fans greeted them at Kennedy Airport. They had top billing on the February 1964 Ed Sullivan Show. 73 million people watched TV that night. I love the way they talk. I just love them. In Washington, D.C., they gave a concert.
They make too much noise to hear us.
I just make believe I'm singing the words.
After the concert, they went to a party. One girl cut off a piece of Ringo's hair. After 2 concerts at Carnegie Hall in New York, the Beatles appeared on a second Ed Sullivan show in Miami Beach. After the show, they visited a yacht.
This is the life.
They were also invited to dinner at a policeman's house.
We thought you should also see another side of America.
Returning to England, the Beatles found they were known everywhere. Even Parliament was talking about them.
How much money does it cost to have police protect them?
It doesn't matter. They are good for the country.
Stop your recorder and turn the cassette over to complete the story.